My husband's family abandoned me in the heart of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar as a cruel joke to teach me a lesson. They took my phone and my wallet, leaving me stranded in the maze-like corridors. They thought the timid librarian wouldn't survive an hour. They had no idea that I speak fluent Turkish and that in this city of 16 million people, I was about to make a single phone call to its most respected historian, my oldest and dearest friend. Our family vacation to Turkey had been simmering with tension from the moment we landed. It was a trip my brother-in-law, David, had planned with the arrogant authority of a seasoned explorer, though his entire knowledge of the country seemed to have been gleaned from the first page of a travel brochure. He strode through the ancient streets of Istanbul, mispronouncing the names of mosques and confidently spouting incorrect historical dates, while my in-laws, Margaret and Robert, trailed behind him, looking impressed. My husband, Ben, just looked exhausted, constantly trying to bridge the gap between his family's loud ignorance and my quiet academic nature. I tried to stay silent. I had learned long ago that my knowledge was not welcome in this family. My passion for history, particularly the intricate and beautiful history of the Ottoman Empire, was a source of mockery for them. They called me a dusty librarian, my doctoral thesis a very expensive cure for insomnia. To keep the peace, for Ben's sake, I had learned to hide the most vibrant parts of myself away. The breaking point came during our tour of the Spice Bazaar. David was holding a piece of what he authoritatively declared to be rare saffron, telling his mother it was worth its weight in gold. I could see from 10 feet away that it was just dyed safflower, a common tourist scam. Trying to be helpful, to save them from being swindled, I spoke quietly to the vendor in Turkish, a language I hadn't revealed I spoke. I politely questioned the spice's origin and price. The vendor, caught off guard, immediately stammered and changed his tune. The family stared at me, shocked into silence. "Where did you learn to do that?" David demanded, his voice laced with suspicion rather than gratitude. "Oh, just a few phrases I picked up online, for travelers," I lied, my face flushing. But the damage was done. I had, in his eyes, overstepped. I had undermined his authority as the great explorer. He gave me a look of pure, cold resentment. And in that look, I saw him share a silent, malicious glance with his mother. A plan was being formed. A lesson was being prepared for the dusty librarian who dared to know more than him. An hour later, we were deepened within the labyrinthine heart of the Grand Bazaar. The air was thick with the scent of leather, sweet perfume, and strong coffee. The noise was a symphony of chaos. Merchants calling out, the clatter of copper being hammered, the murmur of 100 different languages. David led us further and further into the maze, away from the main, sunlit corridors, and into the narrow, winding alleys where tourists rarely ventured. He stopped in front of a small, dark shop, its entrance shrouded in heavy woven kilims. "Look at that one, Clara," he said, pointing to an intricately patterned rug. "Go on, get a closer look. Feel the quality." It was a classic misdirection. I took 3 steps towards the shop, my fingers brushing against the rough wool. I turned back to say something, a compliment on his find, and they were gone. The spot where my husband, my brother-in-law, and my in-laws had been standing just a second before was now occupied by a group of chattering strangers. I scanned the crowded alley, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. They couldn't have gone far. "Ben?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the noise. "David?" A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I reached into my shoulder bag for my phone to call them. My fingers met nothing but the smooth lining of the purse. I frantically dug deeper. It was gone. My wallet with all my cash and credit cards was also gone. I wasn't just lost. I was stranded. No phone, no money, no map, in a country where my family believed I couldn't speak a word of the language. The full, horrifying weight of their cruelty crashed down on me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of abandonment, a joke designed to terrify and humiliate me. I could picture them hiding in a nearby alley, laughing themselves sick at the thought of me, the timid, helpless librarian, lost and panicking. But as the initial jolt of fear subsided, it was replaced by something else, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, a cold, hard, and liberating anger. They thought they had left me in a maze. They had no idea I was standing in what was once my backyard. They wanted to teach me a lesson about the real world. Fine, class was now in session. I stood there in the bustling, ancient alleyway, the chaotic symphony of the Grand Bazaar washing over me. The scent of strong coffee, sweet apple tea, and old leather filled the air. For a fleeting moment, the panic my family had intended for me to feel tried to take hold. I was alone in a foreign country, without a phone, without a single lira to my name. It was a terrifying scenario. It would have been terrifying, that is, if they hadn't chosen to abandon me in the one city on earth that felt more like home to me than my own. Their cruel joke was built on a foundation of willful ignorance. They saw me as Clara, the quiet, bookish wife of their son Ben, a woman whose greatest adventure was a trip to the local library, a timid, unworldly creature who needed their guidance and protection. They had cultivated this image of me for years, and to my shame, I had allowed them to. I had let them believe it because it was easier. It was the silent sacrifice I had made for my love for Ben. He was a wonderful man, a kind and gentle soul, but he was a product of his family, a family that valued loud opinions over quiet knowledge and financial success over intellectual pursuits. My academic life, my passion, was a source of constant, gentle mockery from them. My PhD in Ottoman history was a cute hobby. The years I had spent on my dissertation were my time off before settling down. I saw how this talk made Ben uncomfortable, caught between the family he was born into and the woman he had chosen. So I had made myself smaller. I stopped talking about my work, my research, my publications. I let them think I was just a simple librarian. I had packed away the most vibrant, capable parts of myself into a dusty box, all for the sake of a fragile family peace. Now, standing in that alley, the lid of that box was blown clean off. I thought back to my first time in the city, nearly a decade ago. I wasn't a tourist on a guided tour. I was a 24-year-old doctoral candidate, arriving with 2 suitcases, a modest research grant, and a heart full of academic fire. I didn't stay in a 5-star hotel. I lived in a small, 3rd-floor apartment in the Cihangir district. I didn't learn Istanbul from a tour bus. I learned it on foot. I learned its secrets, its rhythms, its language. I spent my mornings in the dusty, hallowed halls of the Ottoman archives, my fingers carefully turning the brittle pages of centuries-old documents, deciphering the elegant, intricate script. I spent my afternoons getting lost in the city's embrace, learning the tram system, finding the best borek shops, and practicing my fledgling Turkish with the patient, kind shopkeepers who would smile at my grammatical errors. I remember the breakthrough after 2 years of intense study when I realized I was no longer translating in my head. I was thinking, even dreaming in Turkish. This city wasn't a map to me. It was a language I spoke fluently. My academic work led me to him, Professor Alihan Arslan. He was a legend in his field, a public intellectual, and the head of the Bosphorus Cultural Foundation, a man whose books I had studied as an undergraduate. He was meant to be my doctoral advisor, but he became so much more. He became my mentor, my champion, and a dear friend who felt more like a father to me than my own ever had. He was the one who saw the potential in my research, who gave me access to private archives, who would spend hours with me over endless cups of tea in his book-lined office, debating the finer points of 16th century court intrigue. I remembered him telling me once, "Clara, you have a Western mind, but an Eastern soul. You do not just read our history, you feel it." He was a man of immense influence, a personal friend to government ministers and a respected figure known throughout the city. And he was the first person I thought of now. The full, beautiful, and staggering irony of my situation washed over me. My family, in their attempt to teach me a lesson about my own helplessness, had stranded me in the one place on the planet where I was the least helpless. They thought they had thrown me into a labyrinth designed to break me. They had no idea I was the one who had helped draw the maps. They saw the chaos of the Grand Bazaar. I saw a familiar grid of shortcuts. They heard a cacophony of noise. I heard the friendly banter of merchants I knew by name. My anger, that cold, hard knot in my chest, finally dissolved, replaced by a feeling that bordered on pity. They were the lost ones, not me. They were the tourists, skimming the surface of a world I knew down to its bones. They had intended to leave me powerless. Instead, they had given me the greatest gift imaginable, the reason to finally, fully, and unapologetically be myself. I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of the city filling my lungs. I knew exactly where I was, and I knew exactly where I was going. Not back to the hotel, not yet. First, I was going to pay a visit to a very old friend. The lesson my family had intended for me was over. My lesson for them was just about to begin. The wave of cold, hard anger that washed over me in that alley was a clarifying force. It burned away the last remnants of fear and hesitation. I looked around at the Grand Bazaar, at its beautiful, chaotic, and intricate dance of life, and I saw it not as a maze, but as a familiar map. The merchants' calls were not a cacophony, they were a melody I understood. My family thought they had thrown me into the wilderness. In truth, they had just sent me home. With a newfound purpose, I began to walk. My steps were confident, my path certain. I moved through the winding corridors with an ease that belied my supposed status as a lost tourist. I bypassed the main, crowded thoroughfares, instead taking a series of smaller, less traveled alleys I knew from my student days. I passed a coppersmith I recognized, nodding a polite, "Kalai Gelson, may your work be easy," as I went, and he nodded back in surprise. I was no longer an invisible, peripheral character in my family's drama. I was Dr. Clara Evans, and I was walking through my city. My destination was just outside the bazaar's main gate, a small, unassuming tea house tucked away on a side street. It was run by an elderly man named Mr. Chetin, whose shop I had frequented for years while I was a student. He had always been kind to the quiet American girl who would sit for hours with her books, practicing her Turkish with him. I entered the small, cozy shop, the scent of strong black tea and cardamom filling the air. Mr. Chetin looked up from behind the counter, and a slow, warm smile of recognition spread across his face. "Dr. Clara," he exclaimed, his eyes twinkling. "It has been too long. Welcome, welcome." In fluent, respectful Turkish, I explained my situation. I didn't dwell on the cruelty of it. I simply said that I had become separated from my family in the bazaar, and in a stroke of misfortune, my purse had been stolen, leaving me without a phone or money. I asked if he would be so kind to lend me the fare for a taxi across the city to visit an old friend. Without a moment's hesitation, he refused. My heart sank for a second before he held up a hand and smiled. "A taxi for my old friend? Nonsense," he declared. He barked an order to his nephew, who was working in the back. "You will not take a taxi. My nephew will drive you himself. It would be my honor." 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a comfortable sedan, weaving through the vibrant, chaotic traffic of Istanbul. We drove along the coast of the Bosphorus, the water glittering under the afternoon sun, ancient mosques and modern skyscrapers sharing the same breathtaking skyline. I looked out the window at the city I loved, the city my family saw as nothing more than an exotic backdrop for their vacation photos. They saw the sights, they didn't see the soul. We finally arrived at an elegant, historic stone building in the quiet, prestigious district of Bebek. This was the Bosphorus Cultural Foundation, a center of art, history, and intellectual discourse. As I stepped out of the car, the doorman, a man who had worked there for 20 years, recognized me instantly. "Dr. Evans, what a wonderful surprise! Welcome back!" The cool, quiet marble lobby was a world away from the noise of the bazaar. I was greeted with smiles and warmth. The young woman at the reception desk looked up and beamed. "Dr. Clara, the professor will be so delighted. Is he expecting you?" "No," I said with a small smile, "but I hope he will have a moment for an old friend." She led me up to his office on the top floor. Professor Alihan Arslanstedi was my favorite room in the entire city. It was lined from floor to ceiling with thousands of books, with a large antique desk and 2 comfortable armchairs positioned before a grand window that offered a stunning panoramic view of the Bosporus Strait. He was sitting at his desk writing, but he looked up as I entered. His serious academic expression melted away, replaced by one of pure fatherly joy. "Clara, kızım," he said, rising to his feet and opening his arms. "My daughter, what a wonderful, impossible surprise." He held me in a warm hug, and in the safety of his embrace, the tension I had been holding on to all day finally began to recede. We sat, and he poured us tea from a silver samovar. I told him everything. I recounted the incident at the Spice Bazaar, the condescending remarks from my brother-in-law, and the final cruel act of abandonment in the Grand Bazaar. I told the story calmly, without tears, stating the facts as a historian would. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "This is not a joke," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is an act of profound barbarism. To do that to any guest in this city is an insult to our culture of hospitality. To do it to you, a scholar of our history, a friend, it is unforgivable." "I don't know what to do, Alihan," I confessed. "My husband is with them. I don't want to cause an international incident." He gave a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "You will do nothing," he said, his eyes flashing with a protective fire. "You are my guest now. You will stay here. We will have a proper dinner tonight. In the meantime," he picked up the ornate telephone on his desk. "The general manager of the Four Seasons, Mr. Demir, is a good man, and he sits on the board of this very foundation. I believe your family's relaxing evening is about to become very complicated." He spoke into the phone in rapid, authoritative Turkish. Then he hung up. "It is done," he said. "A car from the hotel will be here in an hour to collect you. But they have been instructed that you are not to be disturbed until then. They believe you are in a very important meeting with me, which I suppose you are." He smiled, pouring me another cup of tea. "They wanted to teach you a lesson about being helpless in a strange world," he said, his eyes twinkling with the shared secrets. "I think instead, we will teach them a lesson about who you really are." I sat there in that beautiful, quiet room, looking out at the glittering Bosporus, a cup of warm tea in my hands. I was safe. I was respected. And my family's cruel little game was about to be turned upside down by one of the most powerful men in the city. The lesson was indeed about to begin. I spent 2 wonderful restorative hours with Professor Arslan. We sat in his magnificent book-lined study overlooking the Bosporus, sipping strong Turkish tea from delicate tulip-shaped glasses.
We spoke not of my family's petty cruelty, but of our shared passions, of recently discovered Ottoman manuscripts, of the delicate politics of cultural preservation, of the timeless, chaotic beauty of the city outside his window. In his company, surrounded by the quiet hum of intellect and genuine friendship, I felt the last vestiges of the afternoon's humiliation wash away. I was not the person my in-laws believed me to be. In this room, I was myself again, Dr. Clara Evans, a scholar, a historian, a woman of substance. The world outside, with all its family drama, felt a million miles away.
But in that world, as I would later learn, my family's smug amusement had begun to curdle into a thick, choking panic. I can picture the scene at their five-star hotel with perfect clarity, having an intimate knowledge of both their personalities and the hotel's layout. They would have returned to the opulent, air-conditioned lobby, laughing and congratulating each other on the success of their joke. My brother-in-law, David, would have been the proudest. "That'll teach her to be so smug," he would have crowed. "Let's see how Miss Know-It-all handles herself now." My mother-in-law, Margaret, would have chimed in with a tittering laugh, while my father-in-law, Robert, would have just shaken his head with a condescending smile. Even my husband, Ben, swept up in their confidence and likely assured by them that I would be back any minute, would have been a reluctant, silent party to their gloating. The first hour would have been amusing for them, but as the second hour passed, and then the third, their amusement would have begun to fray. The laughter would have died down. Impatience would have set in, followed by a low-grade, gnawing anxiety. The sun began to set, painting the sky outside the lobby's grand windows in hues of orange and purple. The city was growing dark, and I was still not back. Panic, real and cold, would have finally taken root. David's arrogance would have been replaced by a defensive, sputtering anger. Margaret would have been wringing her hands, imagining the worst. Ben, my dear Ben, would have been frantic, his face pale with a mixture of terror for my safety and a growing white-hot rage at his family's reckless cruelty. I imagined them finally approaching the concierge desk, their earlier confidence completely gone. Our sister-in-law, David would have stammered, trying to sound casual. "She seems to have gotten separated from us in the Grand Bazaar. We were expecting her back hours ago." The concierge, a consummate professional trained to handle any situation with grace and seriousness, would have immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The feigned casualness of my family would have been a blaring alarm bell. A tourist, lost for hours, without a phone or money. The hotel's liability, the potential for a diplomatic incident, it would all have been flashing in his mind. He would have alerted the general manager, Mr. Demir, immediately. It was into this scene of escalating panic that Professor Arslan's phone call would have landed like a thunderbolt from a blue sky. The next moments were described to me later by a deeply apologetic and secretly amused Mr. Demir. He had approached my family, his face a perfect mask of professional calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," he had said, his voice quiet but authoritative. "There has been a development regarding your sister-in-law, Miss Evans." They had all leaned in, their faces desperate. "Have you found her? Is she all right?" Ben had asked, his voice cracking. "Yes, she is quite all right. In fact, she is perfectly safe. She has spent the afternoon and evening in a dinner meeting with Professor Alihan Arslan." He had delivered the name with the reverence it commanded in Istanbul. The family had just stared at him blankly. "Professor who?" David would finally sputtered. "That's impossible. She doesn't know anyone in Turkey." "On the contrary," Mr. Demir had replied, a subtle, cool edge to his voice. "It seems Miss Evans is a very old and dear friend of the professor, and I have just been informed that the professor's personal car is on its way here now. They will be arriving shortly." And so they were forced to wait. trapped in the grand lobby of the hotel, their holiday plans in ruins, their smug prank having transformed into a terrifying social and logistical nightmare. The arrival was, by all accounts, a masterpiece of quiet, overwhelming power. A sleek black Mercedes S-Class, the kind used by diplomats and heads of state, purred to a stop in front of the hotel's grand entrance. The hotel's head doorman, a man who had seen everything, rushed to open the passenger door himself. Out I stepped. I was no longer the flustered, casually dressed tourist from the bazaar. At the professor's insistence, his wife's personal assistant had provided me with a change of clothes, a simple but elegant silk dress and low heels. My hair was neat, my face calm. I looked, for all the world, like I belonged. Then, from the other side of the car, Professor Arslan himself emerged. He was a man who radiated an aura of quiet intellectual authority. The effect on the hotel staff was instantaneous. Mr. Demir, the general manager, practically flew across the lobby to greet him, his head bowed in a deep, respectful gesture. "Professor Arslan, it is a profound honor to welcome you to our hotel. Please, whatever you need." The professor greeted him warmly. Then his eyes found the pale, shocked faces of my family, huddled together near the reception desk. With me at his side, he walked slowly towards them. He looked at David, my arrogant brother-in-law, and his warm, scholarly expression turned to ice. "You must be the family," he said, his voice a quiet, cultured rumble that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. He looked from one stunned face to the next. "I must confess, I am surprised. I have known Dr. Clara Evans for nearly a decade. We worked closely together during her doctoral residency here at the Bosphorus Cultural Foundation. It is puzzling that her own family would be so unfamiliar with her connections in our city. She is one of our country's most respected academic guests. One would assume her safety would be a top priority." The word, doctor, delivered with such casual authority, the way the most powerful men in the hotel were bowing to him, and the way he, in turn, was treating me not as a lost tourist, but as a cherished, esteemed colleague. I saw the look on their faces as the gears turned, as they tried to reconcile the timid librarian from their imagination with the respected Dr. Clara standing before them. Their lesson, the one they had so cruelly designed for me, was just now beginning, and I knew with a certainty that was terrifying and thrilling that it was a lesson they would never, ever forget. The opulent lobby of the five-star hotel, which had been the stage for my family's drama, fell into a deep, stunned silence. The air, thick with their panic just moments before, now crackled with the energy of a world turned completely upside down. Professor Arslan's words, Dr. Clara Evans, echoed in the vast space, a final, definitive judgment that rendered all previous judgments meaningless. My brother-in-law, David, the self-proclaimed man of the world, looked as though he had seen a ghost. His face, which had been a mask of arrogant annoyance, was now a pale, slack-jawed canvas of pure, uncomprehending terror. My mother-in-law, Margaret, simply stared, her hand fluttering at her chest, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the timid librarian she had so gleefully abandoned with the esteemed doctor who was being honored by a man of such obvious importance. They looked at me, truly looked at me, for the very first time, and they did not see a member of their family. They saw a stranger, a powerful and unknowable entity they had made a terrible, terrible mistake of underestimating. It was my husband, Ben, who moved first. He crossed the space between us, his own face a picture of awe and profound relief. He ignored his frozen family, his eyes only for me. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped his arms around me. "You're okay. I was so worried. I had no idea." Professor Arslan, ever the master of a situation, placed a gentle fatherly hand on my shoulder. He then turned to the horrified general manager, Mr. Demir. "Mr. Demir," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of command, "I trust that you will be able to find more suitable accommodations for my dear friend and her husband for the remainder of their stay. The top copy suite, perhaps? Please put it on the Foundation's account." He then glanced dismissively at my in-laws. "And please ensure that their travel companions do not disturb them. Dr. Evans has had a trying day and is in need of some peace." Being escorted by Mr. Demir himself up to the hotel's most magnificent suite felt like floating in a dream. It was a sprawling, beautiful space with hand-woven carpets, original Iznik tiles, and a private terrace that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Bosporus. It was a world away from the cramped, miserable room my family had deemed suitable for me. Once we were alone, Ben finally looked at me, his eyes full of a million questions. "An old friend? A doctoral residency? You speak fluent Turkish?" And so for the first time in my marriage, I told him everything. I told him about the 6 years I'd spent living and breathing this city, about my research, my thesis, my deep love for its history. I told him how I had downplayed my accomplishments, how I had hidden my fluency, all to avoid the familiar sting of their family's judgment, to avoid making him uncomfortable. I laid the hidden parts of myself bare. He listened, his initial shock giving way to a look of deep, profound love and admiration. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said, taking my hands in his. "I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you had to hide. I love your brilliant minds. I love your passion. I am so unbelievably proud of you." In that moment, our marriage was reforged, stronger than ever, finally free from the toxic shadow of their family's expectations. The rest of the vacation was a masterclass in quiet, excruciating awkwardness for the Harrisons. The power dynamic had been permanently and irrevocably inverted. They were no longer the hosts of this grand adventure. They were the disgraced entourage. At breakfast the next morning, the maitre d' personally escorted Ben and me to the best table on the terrace, while my in-laws were told there would be a short wait. Later that day, Professor Arslan sent his personal car to take us on a private yacht tour of the Bosphorus, an invitation that was pointedly not extended to them. They were left behind, marooned in the luxury hotel, their planned tourist activities now feeling cheap and hollow. David, the great explorer, now barely spoke a word, his earlier arrogance replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. On our final day, my mother-in-law and David approached me by the pool. Their apology, when it came, was as clumsy and self-serving as I expected. "Clara," Margaret began, twisting her hands nervously, "we seem to have misunderstood you." "Yeah," David mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That joke, it went too far. We're sorry." They were sorry they had gotten caught. They were sorry I was not the weak, helpless person they had wanted me to be. I looked at them, at their strained, unhappy faces, and I felt a wave of pity. "It wasn't a joke, David," I said, my voice calm and even. "It was a cruel thing to do. You didn't misjudge my ability to speak a language. You misjudged my character. You misjudged me. I hope for Ben's sake that one day you'll take the time to understand the difference." On the plane ride home, a comfortable silence settled between Ben and me. Across the aisle and several rows back, his family sat in a tense, unhappy silence of their own. I looked out the small window at the clouds below, and I finally understood the true nature of the lesson that had been taught. They had intended to teach me that I was small and helpless, but the real lesson was for me, from me.
I learned that I had been hiding my own light out of a misplaced sense of duty to people who would never appreciate it. Their cruel prank didn't break me, it liberated me. My vindication wasn't in their public humiliation, it was in my own quiet, joyful reclamation of my full self. The world they had tried to trap me in was small and petty. The world I had built for myself, a world of knowledge, friendship, and respect, was vast and beautiful, and I was never going to hide it again. An absolutely brilliant lesson in not underestimating the quiet ones. You have to wonder what that flight home was like. This story is all about a hidden skill. What's a secret talent you have that your friends or family would be shocked to discover? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved watching this cruel prank backfire in the most epic way possible, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more stories of sweet, satisfying karma. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.